Welcome to ClimateWatch. I'm David Schechter. 2024 is set to be the hottest year on record. For the first time ever, global average temperature is 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial levels. 2024 has also been one of the 15 wettest years out of the last 130 that we have on record, with 25.22 inches of rain measured in the U.S. compared to our average of 23.18. We'll be visiting some communities hit especially hard to understand how climate change played a role. Then we'll visit coastal Florida, an area threatened by storms and sea level rise, where scientists are creating sustainable designs to protect people and property along the water. And we'll meet a family whose home in Black Rock, North Carolina was one of over 1,000 destroyed by landslides in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. But we begin in the town of Lumberton, North Carolina, which has taken blow after blow from hurricanes over the last decade, despite the fact that it's 80 miles inland. Why is this happening? Storms are now dropping 10 to 15% more rain, according to the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, and by 2053, storms could cause damage to more than 19 million properties, with only a quarter of them having flood insurance. Mark Strassman visited Lumberton to learn how they prepare for a hurricane.
Hurricane Matthew sucker punched Lumberton, North Carolina.
We got you, sir. Stand them up, bro.
80 miles inland, no one saw 20 inches of rain coming.
Lumberton right now is going through a tough time.
The Lumber River crested 11 feet above flood stage. Flooding topped the levee and swamped the city in 2016.
I'm 6'3" and the waters were up to my chest.
We first met Jimmy Hunt 8 years ago, rescuing Matthew's flood victims.
It's pretty horrific what we've seen out here.
The fire chief remembers saving roughly 50 people.
Thank you, we're safe!
Most of them elderly.
10 to 15 minutes from the time the water came over till the water flooded their homes.
And once it flooded their homes, all bets were off.
All bets were off. It was just survival at that time.
2 years later, Hurricane Florence landed the 1-2 combo.
It really boggles the mind, right, that this same thing can happen again. Houses were underwater.
Brianna Goodwin, a community organizer here, remembers 24 inches of rain.
It was almost this feeling of being shell-shocked. Like, I see the water, I see the flooding, but is this real?
Lumberton learned the hard way twice. Today's hurricanes can target communities far from the coast. Gavin Smith, a professor at North Carolina State, studies the impact of climate change on natural disasters.
Not only the storms are becoming more intense, slower moving and water laden, but the populations are changing, and the people that are moving into these hazardous areas may not fully understand the impact.
Warmer oceans fuel storms. Our warmer atmosphere holds more moisture, and storms now routinely drop 10 to 15% more rain. Storms like Matthew,
You slept on the roof.
Slip on the roof.
which I covered back in 2016.
Finding shelters for people gets harder when buildings have no power and no water.
8 years later, there could be a lot more Lumbertons going forward. In roughly 30 years, future storms could cause flood damage to more than 19 million properties, coastal and inland. And only about 1/4 of them would have flood insurance.
We literally lost everything.
Hurricane flooding ruined Sheila Moore's Lumberton house twice. She had no flood insurance. Church groups rebuilt her home both times.
You redid the whole house after Matthew, and along comes Florence.
Another one.
And what was that like?
That was devastating, too.
Even years later, Lumberton's only partially recovered, physically, psychologically.
You don't feel safe. You know that there's something that can destroy your home, and that's just not a very easy feeling to have.
It's a sea change. Today's hurricanes menace more than coastlines.
From one North Carolina town affected by 2024 hurricanes to another. Nearly 2,000 landslides were recorded after Hurricane Helene struck in September. That's according to the United States Geological Survey. Geologists are now using cutting-edge technology to locate areas that are prone to landslides, and research estimates 1,300 square miles in western North Carolina should never be built on again. Dave Malkoff visited the small town of Black Mountain, North Carolina, to learn more.
It happened so fast that I didn't know what was going on.
Caitlin Midkiff was just sitting in the kitchen with her dad when all of a sudden
There was the loudest sound behind us, and then it was like we were getting thrown and pulled at the same time.
a landslide tore through their home. They were buried in the mud for 3 hours.
The dishwasher hit me in the face. The refrigerator would have killed me, but it's up against the tree right now.
Caitlin's dad, Bill, was critically injured, broken neck, fractured back, life-threatening cuts.
And he's a liver transplant patient, so he didn't have his medicine for 3 days.
A Black Hawk helicopter lifted Bill to safety after 3 days.
Because I thought I'd either die of liver failure or gangrene.
Our house was up there.
This is where their home stood for 30 years.
So it's weird to be here and like the house is not where it's supposed to be.
That little creek did all this damage.
We drove the recently reopened roads with independent geologist Jennifer Bauer.
The road is getting tighter and tighter.
Deep into Appalachia, she's looking for evidence of landslides like the ones that devastated the Midkiffs to determine if it's still safe to live here.
The debris flows will travel down the slope like this one did.
Geologists are now using cutting-edge computer scans to identify areas prone to future landslides. Stronger, wetter storms driven by climate change are increasing the severity and frequency of landslides.
We have these purple areas that are where this type of fast-moving landslide, where they might start.
Some of it is really soft, loose.
She sees more than 1,300 square miles in western North Carolina that should never be built on again, an area almost as big as Rhode Island. The state counted more than 11,000 damaged homes, with more than 1,000 marked as destroyed. The Midkiffs are losing more than a house.
No, they said this is probably going to be all condemned by the county.
They just learned their land is no longer stable enough to build on. They have no choice but to move. They're hoping FEMA will assist in buying them out, but it's too early to know if and how many homeowners will get that financial help.
When I married my wife, I told her to pick out a house. We bought that house. We've raised all our daughters in it. You know, that's our life. That's all my grandson has known. But life goes on.
The only life he's ever known changed when the ground disappeared from under his feet.
Coming up next, how rising sea levels are destroying barrier islands along the East Coast. In the last 4 years, nearly a dozen homes on Hatteras Island fell into the ocean along North Carolina's Outer Banks, the latest victims of coastal erosion made worse by rising sea levels and stronger storms. Hatteras is a barrier island which functions as protection against heavy storms, but now rising sea levels driven by climate change are accelerating erosion on the coast and destroying property. I visited the Outer Banks to see what's happening to homes on the island. Living on North Carolina's Outer Banks, photographer Daniel Pullen has seen the thin line between living on the ocean and falling into it.
If you could bring some of the old timers back from the dead and drive them around, they would just be like, what? Why did you build your house, dude?
In the last 4 years, the Atlantic has toppled 10 homes here on Hatteras Island. Pullen captured this one crashing down.
I can't believe I'm watching a house disintegrate into the ocean.
And while less than 70,000 people are permanent residents, to make their living, many of them count on the more than 5 million people that visit each year.
I think people are meant to live on a barrier island, but I don't know to what extent do you have a massive economy on it.
This narrow strip of sand is called a barrier island, and it buffers the mainland against the force of the ocean. In the eastern U.S., barrier islands cover 2,300 miles of seashore, and naturally, they're always shifting. Out on the water, we met Reed Corbett, an oceanographer who runs the Coastal Studies Institute. He works with the community, finding ways to adapt.
The way we are developing on barrier islands and living on barrier islands, like, how does that change the nature of what the barrier island actually wants to do?
Large dunes, houses, the infrastructure that stops the transport of sand across these barrier islands, which leads to a more vulnerable barrier island.
One solution, protecting waterfront homes by rebuilding the beach, pumping sand out of the ocean onto the shore. But that can cost upwards of $25 million. And with rising sea levels and more intense storms driven by climate change, the new sand that used to last 5 to 7 years is now being washed away in less than 2.
The economics won't work always.
Yeah.
And I think we are, on the Outer Banks, I think we're getting to that point.
What's unique about the Outer Banks is almost all of the beachfront belongs to the National Park Service. It bought this home and another and demolished them. Dave Halleck ran that pilot program, and unlike the 10 properties that fell into the ocean, the buyouts prevented homes from littering the beach and ocean with dangerous debris.
We consider this a mitigation program. None of these owners built their houses in these locations. When they were built, there was a backyard, dunes, maybe even a back dune area, and a large white sandy beach. And it's just that erosion in the ocean has caught up to them.
Take somebody that grew up in their small little hometown their whole life and just like, hey, go live somewhere else.
Is there another way that this should be or could be managed?
There's a way it could be managed, and it's to let a barrier island exist the way a barrier island is meant to exist. In order to do that, it means things will look a lot different here. I probably would have to move.
Barrier islands, where people hold tight to a patch of sand that's slowly escaping their grip. If it feels like it's getting wetter and warmer, that's because it actually is. Climate change plays an important role in making our extreme weather more extreme. So let's talk about that with CBS Texas meteorologist Scott Paget. Scott, thank you for being here.
Yeah, glad to be here.
We've talked a lot about how climate change isn't making extreme weather. We're going to have storms, right? We're going to have droughts, but it makes it more intense. I think the question is why?
We're warming. You know, the air is getting warmer. And what's interesting when we talk about precipitation, when you have warmer air, you can have more water moisture get pulled up in there, more water vapor to work with. So that means that we could have heavier days with heavier precipitation, rain events, or days where you see a lot of flash flooding. So you want to break down the science?
Yes, let's break down the science.
All right, let's break down the science a little bit more. So here I am going to geek out a little bit. So just with 1 degree Fahrenheit of a temperature change, that equals 4% more water that's being pulled up into the atmosphere. So with that, then there's the potential of more flooding. On top of that, we have more urban spread, more concrete. So where's that water going to go? Has a hard time getting absorbed then into the ground. So we're going to see that flooding happen.
Yeah, that's where the flooding comes from. Yeah. We've had this summer, this year, 18 major storms, named storms. 5 of them become major hurricanes. Why? Is that an active year, and why so active?
It was an above active season, and the National Hurricane Center, they were looking at the forecast with that, they say it was going to be an active season. But what's interesting is when we look at tropical systems, you need the fuel. So where's the fuel come from? Sea surface. Sea surface temperatures were at record warmth this summer.
Got that warm ocean.
Yeah,
right?
that warm ocean. So you need about 80 degrees for a hurricane to get going. At one point this summer, we had sea surface temperatures of 83 to 85 degrees. That is just supercharged. Yeah. It's supercharged sea surface temperatures, so the hurricanes, the systems are pulling up that moisture, leading to more intense hurricanes. And we saw rapid intensification, which means you have a hurricane that goes from maybe a Category 1 to a major hurricane in a short amount of time. 6 of those systems that happened to this summer.
That's sort of the scary part of the hurricane is the rapid intensification. Yeah. I think just last thought, we're not great record keepers ourselves, like what the weather was like a month ago or a year ago, whatever. But I think people get a sense that we're having these more extreme events. Does the data conform to our idea that things are changing?
Yes, things are changing, and we've seen flash flooding before. You know, I was looking back at 1921 in Asheville. They had a huge flooding event, 80 deaths from that because of two tropical systems over that area. So it's happened before. It's going to happen again, but I think what's interesting, and the data is showing that all of the warming planet, the warming climate is intensifying all of these weather events.
More intensity.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott.
No
Appreciate
problem.
it. Up next, how scientists are turning to concrete to protect people and property from storm surge. Cities along Florida's coast have been hit very hard this year by several hurricanes, including Debbie, Milton, and Helene, causing flooding and catastrophic storm surge. Scientists and entrepreneurs are exploring new ways to build seawalls that will also benefit the ocean's ecosystem. Manuel Bojorquez has more.
Anya Freeman says she was living her best life as a lawyer in Miami. But every time it rained, she had to race home to move her car and protect her belongings.
And I started to realize that the city had a major problem with flooding.
She also started to realize part of that problem came from the traditional seawalls in South Florida and in coastal communities across the country.
Seawalls like this one are meant to protect people from storm surge and flooding, but often they can do the opposite, causing wear and tear on other areas when the waves hit the wall and the energy and water are transferred elsewhere.
The realization ended up changing her life.
I left behind being a lawyer to my parents' horror and decided to start this company, which would come up with a solution for my city first and foremost, and then be able to scale it globally to all cities at risk.
Freeman started Kind Designs, creating the world's first 3D printed seawall.
These seawalls have the mangrove root design, which helps absorb and dissipate that wave energy.
That mangrove root design could protect property and save lives. Freeman calls them living.
What makes them living is three things. One is the concrete is non-toxic, it doesn't leach. Two, has a special texture called rugosity, which is great for oysters, sponges, coral, small organisms to attach. And three, the big idea is that all of our living seawalls mimic local marine habitats.
Further up the coast in Broward County's Wahoo Bay, seawalls look a little different now. The secluded cove north of Fort Lauderdale includes 217 sea hives, which help break up wave action. This new type of seawall infrastructure combines natural green resources and traditional gray construction. Catherine Hendrickson is the executive director.
So these are built with a type of concrete that is biophilic, meaning that it brings in and welcomes new fish and marine life.
Hendrickson says Wahoo Bay has seen a 50% increase in the number of fish species since installing the sea hives.
It's a way of taking a real-time snapshot of an environment in a way that typical science has not been able to do. And we can do it so easily and often that we can really get to see the story of what's unfolding here.
And sometimes that story comes from Mother Nature herself. Coral reefs act as a natural seawall.
Corals are sort of the infantry, if you will, of the first line of defense against storm surge and high waves.
Climate change is threatening them, so now nature is getting a boost from science at the National Coral Reef Institute at Nova Southeastern University. That's where we met Wendy Woodderer.
So this lab is really sort of like the IVF fertility clinic for baby corals.
So why do we have to do this?
What we hope to do here is grow these corals, give them some extra help, where we can replant them back on the reef to help build our coral reefs up higher, make them stronger, which will protect our coastlines.
Relying on nature's designs could be the future of coastal protection.
Is the work that's done here something that can be replicated in other parts of the country, other parts of the world?
Yes, so actually coral restoration is a national priority from NOAA, and there is coral restoration going on in both the Pacific and in the Atlantic Caribbean, and globally as well.
Teams are also replicating sea hives in South Florida and discussing potential projects throughout the world. Freeman's Kind Designs has more than 50 projects in the pipeline for next year.
It's almost like a no-brainer to choose something that's more beautiful and has all of these environmental benefits.
Environmental benefits, which could make thousands of miles of coastline in Florida and across the country more resilient and better protected.
For more stories like these and live coverage of breaking news, stream us right here on CBS News 24/7, available across all platforms. Thanks for watching Climate Watch. I'm David Schechter.